Dean Lyons, thanks for the invite. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. What I'd like to do this afternoon is I'll spend probably 20 or 30 minutes and try to set up this idea around leadership. And I want to do it in two ways. I'll have a slide I'll put up in a moment and just walk through my background. But up front, the main thing I wanted to do is make sure you had kind of in summary format some of the critical leadership lessons that I've garnered over the course of a 3-decade career in 3 industries or sectors at this point. And then I'll use my current experience and kind of run you through, just from an illustrative perspective, the leadership work that we've done at Jamba as an example. So St. Louis native. Dean alluded to my background, public high school grad, St. Louis, Missouri. First member of my family to graduate from college, not to attend, but to graduate from college. And that's an important part of my story. It's an important part of how I lead from just a foundational perspective. It kind of drives the way I view the world. So that'll be an important part of my story. I've spent most of my career at blue chip Fortune 500 companies like Nestle, Nestle Purina for most of, the old Ralston Purina company for most of my career, the Gillette company, Safeway stores here in California, and for me, kind of the common theme, and this is one of the takeaways I'd have you to consider, who you work for in terms of the company values and the leadership ends up being critically important. I've had the good fortune of working for the Coca-Cola company in their Minute Maid division as my first job out of the University of Missouri when Roberto Goizueta was CEO of that company. One of the true legends in the consumer goods space on a couple different dimensions. Just a marketing genius as he transformed Coke in that business, would have been widely recognized in the 80s as one of the top couple CEOs in the consumer goods space, but equally the work at the time that they did in the local communities around the globe that they did business, very focused on being good citizens, and that was important to me as a 22-year-old coming out of undergrad. I followed that move by going to Ralston Purina Company and had the good fortune, and this guy is nearly 80, which is a young man, and he's actually still going. Bill Sturritz, just an absolute financial genius, ran the old Ralston Purina Company. If you looked at the 80s, it would have been the age of big companies acquiring businesses in a wide range of businesses. I was there long enough to see us acquire businesses and then spin them all off. By mid-90s, the Ralston Purina Company that I hired on to ended up becoming 6 or 7 multi-billion-dollar companies as companies went the other way to be more focused in key sectors or categories. But the critical takeaway, just tremendous leadership and vision. Bill is currently CEO at Post, and he's actually rolling up companies again. They've had $2 or $3 billion in acquisitions over the last 18 months or so, from about $1 billion platform that was Post cereal. Tremendous lessons there. And probably the highlight from a career perspective was the time that I spent at the Gillette company. So after 15 or 16 years at Nestle Purina, I ended up going to work for arguably the finest CEO in the consumer space, period, Jim Kiltz. And for me, I think about the lessons that I took away from Gillette. I was a pretty senior executive by that time. I signed on to be a part of a fantastic turnaround team at Gillette, and what would have been the differentiator for me is Jim Kilt's had a history of building CEOs. So if you look around the industry at the time, the CEO at Hershey trained under Jim, the CEO at Nabisco trained under Jim, the CEO at Mattel trained under Jim Kilt's. And kind of fast forward, I spent about 3 years there, very senior position, but got my version of an additional advanced education in running a business. If I think about my experience at Gillette, of our top 60 executives, 55 or so of those are running companies from a size of 100 million plus up to multi-billion, as the folks exited Gillette when we were acquired by Procter & Gamble. So I wanted to just set that up as a reference point, and then I moved to California to work at Safeway stores and had a fantastic experience. I was hired on here by Steve Bird, who was the CEO at Safeway stores when I signed on. But probably more importantly, my immediate boss was CMO at the time, Brian Cornell, and 2 weeks ago, if you're following the retail news, Brian was just appointed as CEO of Target stores. So again, the common theme is it really is important who you work for. It's important the kinds of companies that you work for. It's very important the values of those companies. So I want to run through, kind of quickly a set of lessons learned. So if I'm sitting in your seat, I think there's a few things to think about as you walk through this tremendous experience here at the business school. One would be the company mission and values, and the leaders at the top are just absolutely critically important. I think the cross-functional experience or portfolio of skills that you can build as you come through your business school experience here is really important. And I think you need to be mindful and very intentional on where you spend your time and who you spend your time with. I think the diversity of who you spend time with in terms of background, experience, and even how they think about the world, I think is critically important if I'm sitting in your seat. For me, my cross-industry or cross-sector experience has been really important to the job I sit in today. So I've spent the foundational years of my career in the consumer products industry with top companies. And typically, if you talk to an executive recruiter, they tell you never to switch industries because the failure rate is pretty high. My experience has been the opposite of that. I moved from the consumer products industry to the other side of the industry to go to work for Safeway stores. So I moved to the retail side of the industry, and if that wasn't enough of a risk, I actually moved to the restaurant experience with this current assignment. But I found that each of those experiences has been really foundational and actually has been an accelerator for the work that we've done at Jamba, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. The other point that I'd make is lateral moves end up being really important as you think about a career and building really a portfolio of experience is really what I think will be most valued in the economy we're all going to live in moving forward. I mentioned the diversity of the teams and that being critically important. And that's in every dimension. My best learning about diversity was during my time at the old Ralston Purina Company when we moved to cross-functional commercial teams, and we broke down the functional silos. We put folks in cross-functional teams from IT and supply chain and marketing, and what you quickly find out is that people from different disciplines think about the world very differently, and it's typically more difficult when you put together folks with different backgrounds, but over time they've solved problems more comprehensively and they spur innovation is what I found really throughout my career when I can take folks from different backgrounds, thrust them into a different environment with other smart people that engage a problem from a different perspective, you find that it really drives innovation. stretch and growth assignments. Even here on the campus, I think there are opportunities to put yourself in places that are less comfortable, that I think you find significant growth as you come through the program. Leadership courage is another point that I'd underscore as being really important. And connected to this idea of leadership courage is this idea as a leader of standing alone. From a leadership perspective, you've got to have a capacity to stand alone. One example for me is even taking the job at Jamba. I had every executive recruiting friend of mine said, James, we know you want to be CEO, but do you have to take that job? Because there was probably a 9.5 out of 10 chance that this was going to fail, but I had enough confidence in the breadth of my experience and what I saw in the assets of the culture at Jamba and the wonderful brand, that what seemed like an unsurmountable challenge to most, it seemed like a typical choice to make from where I sat, but that would be an example of standing alone. And then I'd like to reference kind of 3 of my favorite books. The first one is The Leadership Engine. Noel Tichy is the author. Noel Tichy would have led the GE Crotonville Leadership Institute, and it's a book that I leverage as I think about leadership and management practices, especially leadership, with a couple key takeaways from the book. The book talks a lot about developmental intervention, and for me as a leader, what I'm always trying to do at every meeting, every project assignment, or every just individual discussion, I'm trying to change the trajectory of the development of every person I encounter inside of any of the companies that I've worked for. Critical takeaway, kind of leaders as teachers, but being intentional about creating growth. And the growth for each individual is going to be very different. But with that as kind of the going in mindset, it really allows you to kind of unlock the potential for people to innovate. For me, what that looks like is I'll often put people in roles that you wouldn't expect them to be in, which really forces an internal growth and a very different view of the world that focuses on kind of incremental or transformational change in that individual. The second book is The Last Word on Power. The author of that book is Tracy Goss, and I've probably handed out of both these books thousands of copies over the course of my career. That book is all about really personal and individual transformation. Many of you that are here new to the campus, this would be a perfect way for you to think about transforming yourself as you go through this next year, 2 years, or 4 years here at Haas. But fantastic book, highly recommended. And the final book was authored by the CEO at Gillette, and the book is Doing What Matters by Jim Kiltz, and it literally is a playbook on effectively running a company, and it's all about practices, processes, and really almost a CEO's kind of playbook on how to effectively run a company, how to de-risk plans, and how to execute with excellence. So I thought I'd start there, and what I'll do next is I'll spend a little bit of time and talk about the Jamba Juice story and my 6-year experience at Jamba. So Jamba was founded, we'll turn 25 next April. Jamba was founded as Juice Club. The founder of Jamba Juice, which originally was founded as Juice Club in 1990, was a gentleman by the name of Kirk Perrin. And Kirk created this company. He was a cyclist, and he built the brand, his first shop, just to replenish himself after cycling was really his kind of core idea. Fortunately, we had a founder with great vision, and the mission vision that we started with is the one we are executing against today, and it's really to simplify and inspire healthy living, and that's always been the path that we've been on over the course of almost 25 years. We've strayed from that path a little bit over time as we became a bigger company. But I've spent every minute of the almost 6 years that I've been at the company trying to move us back closer to that as our true north as a company. A few details on the company. About $500 million in system-wide sales. We've got about 850 shops on a global basis. We're typically, and we take a look at where we rank in terms of healthy living brands on a quarterly basis. We're typically in the top 5. We trump some brands that actually surprised me when I came to Jamba. We're typically only beat by CPG companies that have significant spending, typically in the first part of the year, but we're always in the top 5. We're never outside of the top 10 companies in the healthy living space. As we look at our core kind of juice smoothie set of competitors, our average unit volume, which is one of the key metrics in the restaurant space, we typically have average unit volumes that are twice most of our competitors. Almost 2 million Facebook fans. We launched early this year in actually January. We launched our Insider Rewards program, which is our rewards or loyalty program, and we've signed up 1 million consumers to the Insider program. So what I wanted to do is walk through really in a couple slides that follow the company that I found, which was really a smoothie shop that had hit upon relatively tough times, and discuss the vision that we've laid out to really transform this brand and company into a healthy lifestyle brand. Again, this is the foundational, and pun intended here, the blend plan. So one of the first things that I did when I joined the company is spent time talking to a combination of consumers, our internal stakeholder groups, my board of directors, our investors, and what I wanted to glean was the key themes that really would define the roadmap or blueprint that I'd use to transform the company. Job one for me would have been to effectively turn around the company. When I signed on at the company, I committed that we'd take multiple years to turn around the company. 3 years was kind of the end point. It probably took 3.5 to really move the company from losing money to a modest profit over that first 3.5 years or so, and really with the end game to move us to a place of transformational growth. I had one of my initial board members that interviewed me. He said, "James, we don't need a turnaround. We actually need somebody who can do a spin up." And just as context, this is a guy who was a VC guy that worked for Benchmark Capital, and he's actually the guy that originally found the entrepreneur that built this company. And I'll do a brief aside. Bob Cagle, who was one of my board members up through about a couple years ago, still an investor in the company, but was one of the key decision makers in the interview process here. And as he set me down, he had a couple who said, love your background, incredible opportunity, but can you make this job your life's work? Because what you typically have in businesses is you'll have leaders that kind of show up, they complete a portion of the job, and then they're off to the next thing. And really what he wanted to probe for is if I could bring the same kind of passion to this brand that he had for the brand and the company and the opportunity that he saw. And a little bit of the opportunity he saw was really driven by how he found the company. So he describes, and this is in the Jamba kind of lore, going to a meeting at a restaurant, and he walks and sees this concept, which is a juice club, and there's a long line when he goes in, and he says, wow, that's interesting. He comes out 3 hours later, and there's an equally long line. He calls his assistant and said, there's something interesting happening here. Cancel my meetings, and he just studies the brand. He ends up chasing the entrepreneur around for about 6 months before he can convince the entrepreneur that there is an opportunity to scale and kind of grow this place. The rest is history. But I thought that would be a really important aside. The key tenets of this part of the plan, this is kind of the third version. What I would have started out with is a vision that wouldn't be too dissimilar in terms of the framework of this, but much more focused on the turnaround. This version of the blend plan is more focused on moving us aggressively to profitable growth as an enterprise. We've got a team that we've built, for this journey. So if I look at the leadership team that runs the business over the course of time, nearly 100% of this group is either new to the assignments that they currently occupy or new to the company. So some of these people have expanded responsibilities inside the company, and some are new to the company. Significant turnaround in startup experience across the management team, across a range of industries, and that starts to get to the diversity that we strive to build into the organization. I want to spend just a few minutes because I want to quickly get to the Q&A. Some of the work that we've done really to almost re-platform the offering. So we would have been primarily at that smoothie shop that I showed on the earlier slide. What we have firmly committed to today is this idea of whole food eating. We see the consumer is accelerating towards real foods. They want whole foods. And we think Jamba, given the strength of the platform that we occupy, having 800 shops nationally, is really well positioned to lead in this space. The consumers that are looking to have whole foods blended in juice are very different in terms of the profile of our core smoothie consumer. They'd be more like the smoothie consumers that are drinking all fruit and vegetable smoothies, but the juice consumer really wants a more veggie-forward offering, and we've crafted a lineup of juice or blended beverages that really deliver on that need, and we scaled that about 4 months ago. We've rolled into 500 plus of our shops, and it'll be fully scaled by middle of next year. But kind of a defining moment for us as we head on this path of growth is this commitment to whole food eating. It's kind of a foundational part of this growth phase of the work that we're doing moving forward. And we've seen a 3 to 4% or a 300 to 400 basis point improvement in our shops where we've deployed this platform, versus shops that don't have it. So this will be a part of the future growth and trajectory of the brand. We've done some work around redesigning and kind of refreshing the look and feel of the shops to really support this agenda. This is kind of the 1.0 version of the work, really more to come. We are moving to a place where we'll be far more design focused. I spent a lot of time around design in my experience at Safeway stores. And you'll see that start to happen as we continue to work the look and feel and experience of the brand. The next couple slides are just several examples to give you an idea of how we're changing, how we engage consumers. And I'll make just really a couple points here. One of the critical priorities for us as we think about engaging, in particular, millennials, video. So we think there is an interesting way from a lifestyle perspective to leverage music and beauty and dance. And we've launched a very significant push on YouTube from a digital perspective. We've had well over a million views. We've aligned with one of the top YouTube properties, Dance On. And this is a place where we didn't even play a few years ago, and the engagement that we've seen from a new set of consumers has been just phenomenal. And we're just warming up in terms of our focus in this work. We also have aligned ourselves with really expert spokespeople, the first of which would have been Venus Williams and her family. Venus happens to also be a franchisee in the DC geography for the brand. And here locally, Vernon Davis from the 49ers is both a spokesperson and also a franchisee in the San Jose geography. So I just wanted to make just those couple points here. In terms of domestic growth, significant growth trajectory. So if you think about where this story started, turnaround, through 3.5, 4 years, squarely focused on growth. We expect to add 100 locations on an annual basis over the course of the next 5 years. So about 500 locations will nearly double our geographic footprint here in the U.S. Internationally, we have about 50 locations that are open. The key markets for us internationally today include South Korea, the Philippines, Canada. We've opened a shop in Mexico. We'll open later this year in the Middle East, and then more on the docket. We think there's potential for close to 1,500 locations internationally, but we've got a very disciplined growth path internationally, but the brand and this idea travels. And then just the final couple slides, and we'll open it up. Just wanted to spend a moment, given kind of where we live here in and around Silicon Valley and the kind of brand that we are. We're big enough, national enough brand that we end up being an interesting proof point for lots of the technology companies are here. And for me, given my experience at much bigger companies where I wouldn't be thinking about resources or this idea of leveraging the extended enterprise, I spend a lot of time these days because Jamba, for the scale of companies that I've historically worked in, is more like a startup than anything. I mean, if you take even the unit I ran at Safeway was $8 billion. So if you think about kind of the scale and proportion, and I have my team maniacally focused on thinking about our assets and how they line up, especially here in the Valley with the technology companies that we partner with, and it's led us to a series of really interesting partnerships, many of which have put us on the forefront of the mobile payment technology. I think I've got the mobile payment technology. So we were lead partners, unfortunate branding on this ISIS. So I'll get that out of the way up front. But that brand, that consortium is a consortium of AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. Fantastic partners, absent of the name. PayPal, we would have been on the front end of their mobile payment, and the same thing with Google and their wallet platform. We've also partnered with a local entrepreneur here from the Bay Area on our rewards program. Spingo is a local startup, so we do big companies and smaller companies, but technology is really an important part of what we do. And I want to go back. This kind of shows you some of the fun examples of things that we've done. One of the key assets that I saw as I looked at the Jamba brand is this is a brand that was much bigger than the size of the company. I mean, we live in popular culture. If I think about my time at Coke or my time at Gillette, we would have paid to be on programs that I'll have people call me and say, James, did you know you guys were in a movie or you were on Jimmy Kimmel last night? And we don't have the resources to pay for those kinds of things like some of the larger firms that I work for. But this is a brand that lives in popular culture. And I think I'll end on this slide. The company, we've worked diligently to position ourselves coming through the turnaround to really win over the long haul. And we've done it with a core set of principles that include really leveraging this iconic brand, but importantly leveraging the strength of the culture and kind of moving that forward with the roadmap of the blend plan that I shared earlier. So with that, I'm going to turn it to the Dean, and
let's do some questions. Thank you, James, for that. Thank you very much. So we do have some time for questions. Use the microphone, please. We have some people, students that are listening from remote, and we also want to capture it on video. Let me just run over real quickly those 3 books that he mentioned, right? One of them was The Leadership Engine. That was the Tichy book, The Leadership Engine. The second one he mentioned was Last Word on Power, and more about personal transformation. And then the third was Doing What Matters, which was a little bit more about operational leadership and Gillette. So if there are questions, please come to the microphone. I'll launch if I may.
Sure.
You know, that phrase you used right at the end, this notion that the brand was much bigger than the company was, right? That had to be part of why, at the end of the day, you knew this was the right decision to go for Jamba. Could you talk a little bit more about that decision, that in some sense that was your courage to stand alone and take a role that you had other options at the time?
Yeah, and I'll make a couple points. And the only reason I had the courage to even take that job, so I'm glad you reminded me of this story. The only reason I had the courage to take this job is my last assignment at Safeway stores exposed me to the organic and natural space. And I sat on one of the industry organizations, the Organic Center. So I sat on the board of directors at the Organic Center, and folks that should have been competitors like Walter Robb at Whole Foods, I consider him to be one of my good friends in business. Another gentleman that I admire is Gary Hirschberg at Stonyfield Farm. So I'm coming from these really big companies, you know, much bigger than most of the companies that I saw in this teeny tiny organic and natural industry, relatively speaking. You know, big companies in that industry, there would have been a few multi-billion-dollar companies, and you can name them on less than one hand. Whole Foods, Unified, which is the big distributor that supplies Whole Foods, and Hanes Celestial. Those would have been the 3 big companies. Most of the other companies, at least then, there's a few bigger companies today, would have been 100 million or less. So if you can imagine the world of business I'm coming from, this looks like a really tiny opportunity when you're looking at opportunities. But what I saw in that industry that I think is really important for this group as a takeaway, I saw people making a difference in the companies and the industry. It was more about making a difference than making money, and you can actually do both. The dean and I, before this session, talked about this idea of conscious capitalism, where you really think about all the key stakeholders equally. The investors are important. The employee has to be at the center of everything that you do. The consumer is a stakeholder, and the environment is a stakeholder, as well as your partners. And that's kind of the way it works. And in the short 3 years that I sat on the Organic Center board and had a chance to, multiple times a year spend time with the folks in this industry, it actually was life-altering for me because it was just a different lens to view business through. And quite honestly, I looked at the impact. Gary Hirschberg, who was running a company that happened to be about the same size as Jamba, he was having more impact on the world from a sustainability perspective than some of the big company CEOs that I saw. And having that knowledge made it more okay to say purpose-driven, being more intentional about the career you picked was also okay. So this has been a choice, and this also relates back to the question that board member, Bob Cagle, asked me. He said, James, can you make this your life's work? That was kind of the filter for me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions, please.
Hi, thank you for coming today. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the R&D program at Jamba Juice, what it looks like, where it's going. Thank you.
Yes, I'd make 2 points, and I'd broaden the R&D question to more the focus that we have around innovation, and it's a more a 3-part way that we think about it. So there is a heavy piece of work around just basic blocking and tackling around QA. So as you think about us handling fresh products, QA is kind of really an essential part and a critical function inside the company. I think we have one of the best, culinary R&D teams, led by an industry veteran from the likes of Yum Brands and Starbucks. And there is a maniacal focus there on having very disciplined processes for innovation. We do a significant amount of testing, both against the consumer, but also in marketplace, where we'll run things through a very disciplined innovation process. And then on the front end of that is our product development, product management discipline, and they work on commercializing the ideas for the marketplace. But we take seriously the work that we do there. The woman that heads our Chief Innovation Officer is a Del Monte and Safeway and Quaker veteran, and she oversees this group. So we run a disciplined process, much like you'd find in the big food CPG companies.
My name's Caroline. I also work in CPG food. So one of the things you mentioned is diversity, and I noticed on one of the slides you put up in regards to your team, you had 3 female senior VPs. So I think that's great in speaking with diversity. But as we know, most of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are white males. So I'd like to find out from you, as a minority, what challenges have you faced? And how have you overcome those challenges?
I'd make a couple points. Excellence in lots of ways trumps everything, but a couple of the points that I made around courage and leadership courage being required. Sometimes you've got to make a change to get what you deserve from a career. I mean, is a big lesson learned, but I want to set a little bit of context, and I know a few of the folks, they warned me that some folks needed to head out to class. So I'm going to try to speed up because this is a really important question to me. Just as a reference point, I've sat on the board of directors of the Network of Executive Women and was one of only a handful of guys, and this is for the food and CPG industries, because I have daughters, and very focused on just leveling the play field, and you do that through education, you do that through varied and different exposure. If I go back earlier in my career at Ralston Purina, one of the only African American executives and one of the few diverse executives in our leadership team, I actually chaired 3 affinity groups. So I chaired the Hispanic organization at the company, the women's organization in the company, and the African American organization at that company, because I was passionate, and I did that because I cared, and it made a difference in the culture and the lives of folks and in their respective careers. If you look at our management team, you only saw a sample of our team. If you take the top 50 executives, half of those are women as well, and we've added the first women to our board in my tenure at the company, because I'll go back to a point I made earlier. Diverse teams broadly make much better decisions. And it's an opportunity for lots of companies. But I've heard a business leader say, when you know something that others don't know, you're advantaged. So one of the advantages that I've leveraged and seen throughout my entire career, if I can put the most talented, most diverse team on the field, they're going to always figure out how to win, period. So I'd encourage you to, hang tough, network as much as you can. There's going to be challenges, but the challenges are all surmountable from my vantage point. And I think we've all got to continue to work at it, and you're going to see much more enlightened companies on a go-forward basis. And I'd encourage you guys to ask that question to all the other speakers that come before you over the course of these few years, because it'll be important.
I have a question from a student here from Kamal. It says, I'm interested in learning about the biggest failures in your career and what did you learn from them?
There's probably too many to list, but what I tell you is some of the biggest failures for me would have been my greatest learning opportunities. I'd maybe make a couple points that maybe will resonate. We were going through a big organizational change, big transformation at the old Ralston Purina company, and there were several big jobs. And in my mind, I thought I was, would be appointed to one of those assignments. Long story short, wasn't appointed. And for me, this was one of those leadership courage moments for me because I had always mentored folks and always tried to encourage people to play through. So this was my moment to be able to do that exact thing. I go into our president at the time and he says, well, you didn't get any of these jobs. And well, what about X job? I said, no, we've got somebody else for that one. We've got this one for you. And long story short, the assignment that I received that I was very disappointed about ended up being the best move of my entire career because it put me in an interface role with an emerging area of our commercial business, working with the likes of Costco and Walmart and Target and the big retailers, but they were small at the time. And I ended up being one of the few people in our operation with detailed experience with those retailers as they grew, and it was ended up being a huge advantage. And the other lessons learned would be from more a leadership perspective. Always be slow as you hire people and very decisive as you find people that don't fit your culture would be, kind of the two lessons. And by the way, it is very warm up here, guys.
Time for a couple more questions, please. Yeah, go for it.
Hi, Steve Bogart. Just wanted to know about some of the idiosyncrasies about leading transformative change in a franchise environment. What kind of buy-in you have to get from the franchisees and things like that.
Yeah, the big, and one of my new franchise partners is actually in this audience, and I didn't expect her to be here, and I'm not even sure why she's here. But she's one of our fascinating, she was our legal counsel at Jamba and ended up almost a year ago raising a hand to buy a chunk of stores. Fantastic leader that we're thrilled to have as a part of our system. So Vicki, hi. But fantastic question. It's really all about, if you think about the franchise community where folks are putting their personal wealth into a brand or a company, it's really all about communication and alignment with the franchisee. So they've got to buy into and align to this vision, and where there isn't good alignment, you find companies that really go sideways. So there's a lot of one-on-one communication. There are various ways to kind of organize the franchisees where they have a voice into the strategy. But it's a fantastic system that we've made an intentional choice to move more towards franchising. We see it as a fantastic way for us to unlock the growth potential for this brand, and the reason we'll be able to add 500 locations over the next 5 to 7 years is because we've moved to a franchise system that wouldn't have been possible as a corporate entity.
Time for one more? Okay, I think we have two more. We'll go with two more.
Let me shout this out front. Quick question. How big is too big for Jamba Juice? Firms like this, niche, great job, but look at Safeway where you were, look at Starbucks. You end up commoditizing yourself. You're just another firm. Harder to keep the culture of people working there. When do you become too big that what makes you successful now disappears?
I think the critical thing is how closely you hold the values. And two companies I point to that I admire, Whole Foods is one, and that's kind of I mean, I love the leaders there. I think they do a spectacular job and have stayed very close to the founding values of that company. Chipotle is another that, so Jamba can at least grow to as big as Chipotle, and I believe maintain the culture, the transparency that we want to build, and the integrity that we want to deliver as a firm.
Just to repeat the question, how big is too big for a company like Jamba? For those who are online, they may not have heard the question. Thanks for that, Jim. We have time for one more. I think there was a gentleman in the back who, yeah, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Rajat. I'm a full-time MBA student. So my question to you is, I saw the slide about your blend 3.0. I'm sure there was a blend 1.0 and 2.0 as well, which actually helped you turn around the company or transform from a company that was not doing well to such a successful company. I'm going to ask you to dwell a little more on that. What was your experience for turning around? Is it an evolutionary change that you bring around? Is it more revolutionary? Or can you not group it in these two kind of black and white spaces? And how did you actually bring around this change?
Yeah, for us, I'd set the stage. There was a burning platform. So literally in 2008, the company had same-store sales that had declined by 8%. We had lost almost $150 million. We were out of money, which is a problem. And they didn't have a CEO at the time. So there were 3 members of the board running the company. So with that as the stage set, I started in December 1st, 2008. So if you remember, so the good news is you got the job, and the bad news, you got it in the middle of this recession. So burning platform, high sense of urgency. So my mindset going in is I really needed to figure out the critical levers that needed to be pulled in at least the first couple quarters, or it was absolutely game over, not only for me, but for the company and the livelihoods of lots of people inside the company. So we focused on laying out Blend Plan 1.0 and the strategy. We needed to recapitalize the firm, so I was out pitching how we transform this brand. And then we needed to make 2 or 3 critical operational moves to start to turn around the business. And also as a part of that plan, we moved to what I would describe as an asset-light model and moved ourselves to a franchise model, which we thought was the best way to leverage the expertise of the management team, the asset of the brand, and really to grow it to full potential.
James White, there are many, many things that we're going to take away from this. One thing that sticks for me in particular is this notion of creating growth in your people. People say that many leaders become so great, not just because they've had more and better experiences, but because they draw more insights from those experiences. That's very clearly your model, and you're terrific at communicating them. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Dean.